Stipe Miocic was lobbying for a bigger octagon. This was a headline. I had a lot of questions asking me, hey, what's he talking about? So, if you don't know, or even if you do, allow me to condescend, but just to answer that question, the UFC will use two different size cages. And the commission rule on that is like a minimum size. And I'm going off of the rule for boxing. I couldn't state it for you off the top of my head for the cage, but like boxing by example must be 17 by 17. Now you could go 18 by 18, you could go 24 by 24, but they set a minimum. So the UFC has two different cages. Now the relevance and the reasoning for that is simply whatever venue they're playing. If they're going to a venue and there are pillars, by example, that are holding the structure up, the cage you can't move the pillars. So you gotta move the size of the cage. The UFC used to play the Hard Rock in Las Vegas. The venue was called The Joint. I got to fight there. Got to fight there in the UFC, got to fight there in WEC. Just to personalize it, but that was one of those situations where it was a smaller venue, they brought in a smaller cage. They go to an arena, all the room they want, they prefer to use the bigger cage. Okay, great. That never meant anything to anybody. That was happening unilaterally. As a fighter, you would never know. It was never discussed. It was never a thing until Matt Mitrione. Matt Mitrione is the one who brought to everyone's attention, including mine, that there is a difference within strategy and style based on the size of the cage. And I remember when Mitrione was saying it, I was just looking at him almost dumbfounded. I go, what are you talking about? And to give you the backstory on that, Matt was getting ready to fight Roy Nelson. And he had called up matchmaker Joe Silva and said, hey, by the way, what cage are we fighting in, the little one or the big one? Now, how that conversation went, if that conversation went, but this is how this became known to the public. Matt's version of the story is that he was told it would be the bigger ring. When he shows up, it was the smaller ring. And that affected him mentally because he had a strategy that he now cannot employ. Everything that he worked on in training camp, he cannot go out and do. To me, that sounded like excuse making at the highest of level. I mean, I had never heard or even fathomed or even thought about anything like this. But before you turn on Matt Mitrione and think he made an excuse, hold that thought. Apparently, it's a very real thing. I just wasn't aware of it. I'm assuming you were not aware of it. Have you ever watched, by example, a UFC and sat back and go, oh, they're using the little cage tonight? Or go, oh, I see. Oh, great news. They're using the big cage. No, it's just not one of those things. So Mitrione brings this to everyone's attention. Now, hold on, because the story gets a lot better. Mitrione disputed the outcome of that match with Roy because of the misinformation that he relied on the size of the cage. He rematched Roy in a cage that was the size that he prepared for, and it was 100% different fight. Not only was it a different outcome, it was a different fight. I would go as far as to say that Roy Nelson dominated Mitrione in the first contest. I would go as far as to say Mitrione dominated Roy in the second contest. So Mitrione proved that there is something to this, at least for certain athletes, him being one of them. So I've never questioned when an athlete talks about the size of the cage sets. I can tell you for me, I've never knew if I was fighting in the big cage or the little cage. When I fought in the little cage, I didn't know it was the little cage until years later when Mitrione brought this to everybody's attention and used, by example, the Hard Rock and the Joint specifically, of which I had fought in as the smaller cage. Didn't even know. That doesn't mean everyone's like me, and Matt taught me that. Now, so when Stipe, here's the general belief. The general belief. If you're a striker, you would like more room. You would like the larger apparatus. If you're grappling heavy, you would like a smaller apparatus. That is the general belief. So when Stipe comes out and says that he lobbied for the bigger cage, what he's saying is, I respect Daniel's wrestling, and I feel that the smaller cage gives him an opportunity, and I feel that I favor the striking. Stipe is also known for his footwork, tremendous footwork, particularly for a heavyweight. And it gives him less room to move around. So I'm only bringing this to you because Stipe didn't have to offer this to us, and who he lobbied for, who he lobbied to, who he called up and said, hey, can we bring in the big cage? I haven't the foggiest idea, but he did offer this piece of information. Stipe, in typical Stipe fashion, said, I don't care. Is what it is. Nothing can be done. If I had my preference, I'd go for the big cage. I definitely wanted the big cage. It's in the little cage, whatever. Furthered that thought by saying, the little cage that we're going to fight in is actually the same size as the cage that I train in at my gym every single day. So there's no predetermined feathering of a nest for a fall being done by Stipe. Don't make any mistake about that. But he brought this to everyone's attention. And I did think that it was very interesting. Again, I think I'm personalizing it a little bit more, but I didn't even know about this until Mitrione brought it up. And now all these years, 10 years later, you've got the heavyweight champion of the world also bringing it up. You'll hear debates on ring versus cage. I, again, to personalize, competed in both. And there is a difference, but boy, are we ever splitting hairs here. If you learn how to use the fence, the cage, it can become a tag team partner. I mean, the way that Khabib uses that cage to mount his offense, that is a tag team partner. And if you were to put Khabib into a fight that was in a ring, you could have a meaningful discussion of what he's going to have to change stylistically and strategically. And I only bring that to your attention because as we're looking forward to a fight that is as close as any fight possibly we've ever seen. Same two athletes fought under the same rules at the same weight class on two different nights and had two completely different fights with two varying outcomes. So when you start to understand that everything you possibly want to talk about is a very relevant talking point. I mean, we are talking about a game of millimeters here. The size of the ring is a fair discussion point.